Every time we lift our heads from our work to consider how our actions affect the future, we begin to think strategically. Every time we consider how other people respond to our actions, we are thinking strategically. Strategic thinking is a way of making sense of the complex world around us. It's a way of peering into the future without fear, but rather with a surety and confidence that our actions today will yield the best possible outcome tomorrow. Let's take an example from sports, from a game that is dear to the hearts of many Americans and one of the most instructive of games where strategy is concerned, American football. Even if you've never enjoyed or even understood a game of American football, I think you'll find that it is an especially tractable game to strategic analysis. There is an explicitly gladiatorial ethos. It's complex, and the content is perhaps surprisingly cerebral. Let's focus on a crucial 10 to 15 seconds in the game. Now, this is the time between the call of a play and the snap of the ball to start the play. During these crucial seconds, much of a strategic nature happens on both sides of the ball. The offense is called a play, a plan, if you will, to achieve the intermediate objective of moving the ball to achieve a first down. This plan is according to a particular situation on the field. The distance to achieve a first down, the number of downs remaining, the distance needed to score. These are all objective positional aspects that we consider when we decide which play to call. The defense looks at the same situation on the field and calls a plan to resist the offense. And that's it. Then the play is executed. Right? Wrong. Circumstances change rapidly, and the great commander, the capable strategic thinker, must be able to respond properly and promptly. What happens next is where truly powerful strategy emerges. As the quarterback walks to the line of scrimmage, he has but seconds before the play must be launched. The ball is snapped. In this 10 to 15 second window, he surveys the defense. He looks at their formation. He tries to recognize the pass coverage, whether zone or man-to-man coverage. He looks for clues in the posture of the players as to what the defense might do. He surveys his environment right up to the moment of execution of the plan. And if changes in that environment make it necessary, he will change the plan. The defense, too, is acting. It is disguising its coverage. Key players are moving around, feinting and deceiving, giving false signals. In that narrow window of time between the break of the huddle and the snap of the ball, the quarterback collects information on his opponent. He processes it, and he may change the play as a reaction to the other team's anticipated course of action. And then he executes that play, continuing his adjustments as the play develops. A premier example of a quarterback with this combination of insight and ability to execute is Hall of Fame quarterback Joe Montana. His former coach, Bill Walsh, also in the Hall of Fame, put it this way. The single trait that separates great quarterbacks from good quarterbacks is the ability to make the great, spontaneous decision, especially at a crucial time. The clock is running down, and your team is 5 points behind. The play that was called has broken down, and 22 players are moving in almost unpredictable directions all over the field. This is where the great quarterback uses his experience, his vision, mobility, and what we will call spontaneous genius. He makes something good happen. This ability to change the plan and make something good happen is what distinguishes genuine strategy. It is the dynamic of action and response that yields optimum results throughout a game as a team's strategy is executed. The strategic action-response dynamic I just described comes to us not merely from the Football Hall of Fame. It goes back more than 2,000 years to the time of Sun Tzu in ancient Greece. Now imagine sitting at a conference table with the greatest strategic thinkers of all time, Sun Tzu and Hannibal, Machiavelli, Napoleon, and Clausewitz. Add in business strategists like Michael Porter, Gary Hamel, and C.K. Prahalad, and a winning coach like Vince Lombardi. Add in great political leaders like Winston Churchill, CEOs from top companies, and the most successful entertainers and media figures. What would you ask them? How might their insights transform you into a powerful and capable strategic thinker? Let's find out over the course of 24 lectures. We aren't born with a fully developed ability or desire to think strategically. It's a skill that must be cultivated and practiced. Many people simply don't think strategically. If anything, some people do the exact opposite of thinking strategically. They consciously reject thinking about tomorrow. They think only of today. Philosophically, this might be akin to an eat, drink, and be merry view of life. For example, young people who enjoy a good party awaken in the morning with awful hangover headaches and who swear they'll never do it again. And yet, they repeat their behavior the following weekend and the next, either forgetting about the inevitable result or thinking that the after effects somehow might be different this time. This kind of thinking is also prevalent in the workplace. I call this cognitive confinement or static thinking. It happens in sports too. I recall the old chant from my college days when we had a particularly unimaginative coach. When he found something that wouldn't work, he stuck to it. It led to chants from the bleachers, up the middle, up the middle, up the middle, punt. This, of course, referred to his predictable play calling that led to predictable on-field results. The great physicist Albert Einstein observed that insanity is the propensity to do the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results each time. This is the very antithesis of thinking strategically, and this occurs in the workplace more often than we'd like to admit. Many of our associates don't engage in a methodical process of questioning, evaluation of assumptions, investigation, information gathering, analysis, planning, and then action. Many people simply function in routines they don't question. Perhaps they live life day to day. Perhaps they face the same problems every day, always losing their keys, always getting caught in traffic in the same place at the same time, always dealing with the same bottlenecks at work, unable to get people around them to work together toward common goals, always working at cross purposes with other people, teams, or divisions. We all think about the future on occasion, of course, but there's a tremendous difference between strategic thinking and daydreaming about what might be. Strategic thinking is about setting goals and developing long-range plans to reach those goals, plans based on careful analysis of internal and external environments and on the actions of others. Strategy is future-oriented. Strategic thinking involves thinking logically and deeply about the future. It means embracing the idea that where we want to be 5 years from now, 5 months from now, should inform what we do today. This notion of strategic thinking is shaped greatly by military influence, and this hardly surprises us, since the military arts have developed a vast historical treasure of strategic theory and practice. But strategic thinking is not necessarily military in character. It's simply a way of looking at the world with engagement and with purpose in mind. My own background and my approach to strategy in this course combines approaches from the military, business, sports, and politics. As a fencer in college, I learned what all sportsmen learn with regard to battling with an opponent, the importance of studying the competition, learning as much as you can about his tendencies, his habits, his weaknesses. Later, as a young military intelligence officer during the Cold War in West Germany, I was introduced to the deeper aspects of competitor analysis and the importance of retaining flexibility on the battlefield during the execution of any plan. Now, I teach strategic management at a major university, and the lessons of competition remain robust and equally applicable. I think the best approach to strategy, as you'll see, is to learn what we can from the long history of military strategy, but also to give equal attention to strategy in business, in politics, in sports, and in other aspects of life. To prepare us for our journey into the realm of strategic thinking, let's learn some of the key terms, definitions, and concepts that we use throughout the course. First, strategic intent. Strategy aims to advance our own big ideas. Strategic thinking has a term for this, these big ideas. It's what business academics Gary Hamel and C.K. Prahalad called strategic intent. Strategic intent is essential to any powerful and effective strategy. For Coca-Cola, decades ago, this was making it possible to buy a Coke anywhere in the entire world. For Tata Motors in the 21st century, this was building and selling the world's cheapest car. For any strategy to rise above the level of mere technique, it must have a powerful and inspirational strategic intent, whether to animate an individual, or to inspire a corporation, or to fire the imagination of a nation. John F. Kennedy declared, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade." Strategic intent compels us to think about the future, the home we want, the career we want, the retirement we want. Without a powerful vision, effective strategy is non-existent. Strategy is one of those rare terms that can be used as a rhetorical garnish on our prose. It provides cachet and gravitas. Instead of mere plans for the weekend, we develop a strategy. Now, this is probably only natural since generals craft strategy. Smart people craft strategy. Well, we want to craft a strategy too. But what is it? And where did the term originate? When I put these questions to my students, they respond with answers within a narrow band. Well, strategy, it's a plan. It's a grand plan, an ultimate plan. We may think of it as a plan, but that would be too simplistic. It involves much more than simply eyeballing a set of facts and pulling an answer out of the hip pocket. It's a way of perceiving and of considering the future with our aims and our goals in mind. Planning is indeed part of strategy. But if it were just a plan, nothing would distinguish it from much of the mundane scheduling that virtually all of us do. A strategic plan is a way of dealing with a constantly changing environment, both responding to that environment to achieve our goals and attempting where possible to change that environment to our benefit. Sun Tzu offers us one of the most well-known examples of strategic theory in his opus, Art of War, which first appeared in the form that we know today approximately 2,300 years ago. Scholars argue over the identity of the author, but his work finally appeared at some point in the 3rd century BC. Sun Tzu's brilliance lies not in offering an explicit set of maxims for conduct of war, but in his recognition of the fluid nature of reality and how any practitioner of strategy must constantly and swiftly adapt to that reality. Our word strategy is derived from the Greek word strategos, which originally meant army leader. It was once the term for a military governor in ancient Greece. The term strategy did not appear in the English language for the first time until the early 19th century. Thanks to Napoleon and his wars, the 19th century saw a flowering of the concept of strategy in the Western world, with a series of publications by Antoine de Jomini, most notably his Summary of the Art of War in 1838. Jomini's contribution to strategic thinking lies in, first, his identification of interior lines of communication. For example, a family that lives together has clear interior lines of communication compared to a family where some members live apart. Second, his notion of concentration of force. Concentration of force in space and time as keys to victory in competition. Jomini's approach to strategy is like the calling of a play during a huddle. In fact, Jomini conceived of strategy as beginning from a kind of geometric precision. On the other hand, we have Clausewitz. Karl von Clausewitz disagreed with Jomini in important respects. He focused more on what the quarterback does after the huddle. A Prussian military officer who served on the opposite side of Jomini in the Napoleonic Wars, Clausewitz viewed uncertainty, chance, and probability as three forces of conflict, what he called friction. Thus he called war the province of chance. It was a constant battle with the unexpected. To overcome this friction, he offered his famous and enduring advice on how to grapple successfully in competition, the notion of coup d'oeil, the French expression for the stroke of intuition and genius. This is the concept of the rapid and accurate decision that confers competitive advantage on the strategist who exhibits coup d'oeil. Together, these two Europeans, Jomini and Clausewitz, offer complementary positions for bringing strategy to bear on conflict. Jomini focused more on defining the best practices of his day. Clausewitz focused instead on how to think about what to do beyond the best practices of the day. Both are necessary, and the same sort of complementary emphasis on best practice versus going beyond best practice can be found in the business world as well. One of the most influential strategists of the 20th century was Sir Basil Liddell Hart, whose contribution was the concept of the indirect approach, a form of misdirection. This was the notion that we should never expend our energies with frontal assaults on an entrenched enemy. His theory was, of course, influenced by the ghastly trench warfare of World War I and its direct assaults across open ground. Hart insisted that instead of grinding our strength against enemy strength, we should seek interesting alternative routes to achieve our objectives. We should shroud our moves and intentions in mystery, and we should keep our competitors off balance and ignorant of our aims. His ideas were not so influential in Britain, but eagerly absorbed in Germany, which developed the Blitzkrieg. An example in business is the case of Swatch. This popular watchmaker developed a side business providing internal movements to manufacturers of Swiss-made luxury watches. Eventually, Swatch became dominant in the manufacture of these internal watch movements, and Swatch decided to cut off sales of those critical parts and reserve them exclusively for its own high-end watches. That's the indirect approach. We sometimes hear strategy used in conjunction with tactics. Sometimes the words are used interchangeably, but there is a difference. We tend to think of strategy as part of some higher realm of planning. Generals around sand tables, executives in the corporate suite, coaches in the film room, political candidates huddling with their advisors. The term tactics, on the other hand, yields images of squad leaders leading their troops to the objective, linebackers blitzing on third down, the marketing department rolling out a new ad campaign, candidates giving speeches, and workers collecting signatures. But strategy and tactics exist on a continuum, and whether we categorize an activity as tactics or as strategy is often simply a matter of where we are located on the hierarchy of action. My strategy may be part of someone else's grand strategy, and thus, from their perspective, my strategy becomes their tactics. But the distinction works for you as an individual as well. If your strategy is to become a doctor or lawyer, the courses you take are part of that strategy, but the ways you choose to study and prepare would be tactics. Similarly, Clausewitz distinguished between strategy and tactics by focusing on levels of conflict. In his words, just as tactics is the employment of military forces in battle, so strategy is the employment of battles to achieve the object of war. And so, we see that Clausewitz defined tactics as the use of engagements in the execution of the strategy. Each level of organizational activity requires strategic thinking and the tactical execution of that strategy. Tactics are the execution of strategy. And in the execution of a strategic plan on the battlefield, exigencies arise. The unexpected strikes us. The battle unfolds in ways that surprise us. These developments require reaction on the battlefield, improvisation, seizing of critical moments, the good sense to retreat, the strategic intuition to move left instead of right. This ability to react at the moment in the appropriate way is a part of strategic thinking that is as important as crafting a cool and deliberate plan before the fact. In all of these, the thinking remains the same, differing only in the scale of time and of space and of resources. Strategy encompasses well-executed tactics and cannot be divorced from it. Many a great strategic plan can falter because of a failure to recognize this crucial point. Moreover, strategic thinking does not end with the crafting and execution of a strategy. Strategic thinking means constant interaction with the environment during the execution of our strategy. For example, always treat with respect anyone you interact with. Successful strategy is dynamic, it is adaptive, it is opportunistic, and it depends upon the swift, bold, decisive, and crisp execution of tactics. Although many fundamental ideas about strategy were pioneered in thinking about war, strategic thinking has naturally extended itself into business, into politics, and into sports, where great organizations of all kinds, not just armies, require guidance of the sort that strategic thinking provides. Business has proven to be a very fertile area for the development of strategic theory. Harvard business professor Michael Porter almost single-handedly elevated strategic thinking to a new level of respect in the nation's business schools, beginning with his path-breaking work in the 1980s on competitive advantage, on competition, and on strategic thinking. Porter says that strategy means choosing a different set of activities to deliver a unique mix of value, doing things differently. For me, Porter's definition of seductive in an incredibly positive manner. Porter's concept of strategy as choosing a different set of activities bridges the gap between the military and business, and between ancient and modern as well. Let's consider the ancient warrior Hannibal and his victory at the Battle of Cannae. In 216 BC, at the Battle of Cannae, the great Carthaginian general Hannibal was outnumbered badly by the Romans, so he should have lost. But, armed with fewer resources than his Roman enemies, Hannibal configured his forces differently. He didn't follow the best practices of his day and line his soldiers up in the usual way. Instead, he outmaneuvered and he outsmarted his Roman enemy with a battle plan that enveloped his numerically superior foe and completely destroyed him. And it was Hannibal's bold way of rejecting the usual forward march of phalanxes that yielded his success in battle. Similarly, choosing a different set of activities was a defining feature of the early Apple computer and its role in triggering the personal computer revolution. Apple inventions of the early 1980s, especially the Macintosh computer, were a deliberate turn away from the mainframe computers of that time. This willingness to think different was Apple's strength from the beginning and went on to become a marketing slogan for the company starting in 1997 as Steve Jobs returned to the company and re-energized it. Strategic thinking is goal-directed, it is structured, and it is focused on the future in a precise way. It is analytical, it's ambitious. It concerns power and trends. It concerns uncertainty and the resolution of that uncertainty or learning to coexist with and accommodate that uncertainty. It is instrumental. And this means that we utilize strategic thinking as an instrument to achieve our goals. It becomes a resource, much like money or time or labor. Strategic thinking also becomes a lubricant that makes all of our other resources work better. Strategic thinking is useful across a range of activities, from the grand and sweeping to the at-home and everyday. Begin your day doing just 5 minutes of an activity that contributes to one of your strategic goals. Anywhere we find strategy being used in any capacity, strategic thinking is present. To demonstrate the versatility and usefulness of strategic thinking principles, in this course we take conceptual cuts at our strategic concepts and we see how they play out in examples from the realms of business, of sports, politics, and the military. Here are just some of the topics we cover. The principles of conflict. Over the centuries, soldiers and scholars alike have attempted to develop strategic doctrine, or so-called principles of war. The idea being that there may be some key to human conduct that remains valid, regardless of the circumstances of time and space. And over the centuries, these various theories have tended to overlap. Thomas Jefferson once said of religion that if you would know the truth, then look at what the great religions of the world agree on. There you will find important keys to human conduct. Now, whether this is true or not for religion, it does seem to be true for military strategic doctrine as embodied in the principles of war. The United States' own official principles of war, first published in 1921, resemble the principles of war that can be found in many other countries and times. When we talk about strategy, we really cannot ignore the role of intelligence in our discussions. Intelligence and analysis plays an increasingly important role in critical thinking. It provides the raw material to build a sound strategic structure. Not only do we want to find out what the other side is doing, we want to mislead him about our own intentions. In the first Gulf War, for instance, in 1991, the U.S. military used multiple deception techniques to confound Saddam Hussein's forces, then occupying Kuwait. One ploy was a faked invasion of Kuwait from the sea, which tied down close to 100,000 Iraqi soldiers. The 4th and 5th Marine Expeditionary Brigades cruised in circles in the Persian Gulf, as if poised for an amphibious assault on mined and well-defended beaches. The ploy distracted attention from the actual ground assault by General Norman Schwarzkopf, who crafted a masterful and classic left hook around the flank of the defending Iraqi army. In this case, the invasion deception was clearly communicated to the Iraqis, who then adjusted their own defensive actions in accord with what U.S. planners wanted. In competitive situations, the surprise attack smacks of the not-so-genteel aspects of conflict. We think of Pearl Harbor. We think of the ambush. In sports, in business, and in politics, we can admire a well-crafted surprise. Think of American football, where surprise and deception are integral parts of the game and are crucial to gaining competitive advantage. Here are some terms that are used all the time: fake punt, reverse, draw play, play-action pass. On defense, we hear of how a team is attempting to disguise its coverage. As an example, let's have a look at the draw play. This play attempts to draw defenders into the wrong parts of the field. Specifically, the draw looks like a pass play, which draws the defenders into spreading out downfield to defend against the pass. But it's actually a running play. This puts the defense off balance and a step slower in reacting. The opposite is the play-action pass, which is a pass play that is designed to look like a run. Here, the play-action might be the quarterback pretending to hand the ball to a running back before actually making a pass. In both the draw and the play-action stratagems, the idea is to get the defense to commit to the wrong course of action and to give our own plan a greater chance for success. It slows the reaction of our opponent. Surprise and deception serve us as useful tools to advance our strategic goals. Deception can turn a bad situation into good, and it can turn a good situation into victory. The 5 basic types of surprises at our disposal are surprises of intention, of time, place, strength, and style. And in our lecture on surprise, we look at each one. And strategy in a full sense equips us with tools that help us meet that future with confidence, tools of analysis that can aid our understanding of the powerful forces that shape our future, if not in completely satisfactory manner, well then at least in much better fashion than the alternative presented by complete ignorance. One of the most effective tools my students find empowering is the analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's an analytical tool that ensures that we look at all aspects of ourselves or our firm, as well as the external environment, to ensure that our strategic intent matches well with our resources and our capabilities. We discuss that tool in Lecture 10. So let's gather everything we've touched on so far to define strategy itself. That is, our definition should be robust enough to encompass all of the fields of activity where strategy is used, and it should encompass all the strategic thinking skills we'll cover in this course. Let's offer it now. Strategy is a method or plan that we craft to bring about a desired future, such as achievement of a goal or a solution to a problem. It's a plan that assesses, acquires, and allocates necessary resources to the most effective and efficient use. And it's a plan or method that anticipates and incorporates competitor responses. So, it's apparent that strategic thinking is much more than just getting your schedule together for the week. It's not just a schedule, even a clever schedule. Peter Drucker, the great 20th century management thinker, observed that there are 2 types of thinking about objects and thinking about people. Static thinking involves planning around objects and is quite easy. The variables are few and relatively unchanging. You prepare a schedule. Strategic thinking, however, is immensely more difficult because it involves anticipating the actions and responses of competitors and preparing accordingly. When we learn to think strategically, it helps us to make sense out of chaos. It helps us to impose order onto a reality that remains stubbornly disorderly. Strategic thinking skills are most critical in the moments when an outcome is uncertain and additional strategic action is needed. Our strategic thinking skills are fully in play. This is the quarterback in the seconds before the snap, the courtroom attorney in a last-minute maneuver, the closing minutes on a stock exchange trading floor, or the perfect teaching moment with a child. But in those critical moments of sometimes rapid move and countermove, you must bring together a whole set of skills that you can learn. Strategy is a complex, multifaceted subject, deeply rooted in history. When we learn to think strategically, it helps us to make sense out of chaos, and there are many contemporary applications. We can learn to utilize the forces around us to our advantage, rather than allow those forces to pummel us. We learn to quarterback our own lives, both by planning ahead and by adapting our plan in the moments of decision that matter most. In this course, we cultivate the benefits of strategic thinking. As a strategic person, we can enjoy increased productivity, work satisfaction, more predictability, less stress, greater efficiency, a greater chance at victory, all of which enhances our chances of succeeding in life on our own terms. And that is an incredibly exhilarating prospect.